panel for this, and we're joined by Councillor Rachel Sutton, who is the Deputy Leader of Exeter City Council and the portfolio holder for Net Zero. We have Lynda Wookey from Exeter City Futures, who is also within the university. She's the ECF Director of Policy and Innovation and Engagement. We have Tess Walsh joining us from Fridays for Future, taking a break from her school. And we have Madeleine Greenhalgh, who is here from Green New Deal, Devon. We're really looking forward to hearing from you all. And so without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Rachel and ask you to kick off for us on Exeter's net zero plan. Rachel, you're muted.
That'd be a good start, wouldn't it? Hi, Jill. Thank you for that. And hi, everybody. I'm looking around the faces on the call. I'm mindful of the fact that I've met a few of you, which is great, but I think I've met a few of you on a previous presentation that I did for Transitions Exeter. So hopefully you will see that since that last one a while ago, we've made a bit more progress. My portfolio around net zero is, I think it's a statement of intent from the City Council of the importance to both the council and the city. I did have climate and culture as my portfolio, but in the recent reorganisation, I'm now doing the net zero. And Exeter is committed to addressing the climate emergency and doing it in a real way, making positive changes for our residents around the city. But I suppose the caveat on that is we are a very small district council that doesn't, because of the two-tier system, have responsibility for highways and transport, which is one of the biggest issues. And like all councils, is subject to the financial constraints, having had 10 years of austerity and cuts in our funding, and the recent crisis over the last year, which has had put additional budgetary pressures on us. So we're still committed to doing it, but the landscape around us is not ideal for making changes that inevitably will cost money. And we are committed to spending that money, but everybody needs to be mindful of the fact that the new money that we put into these schemes potentially will have the impact of taking money away from other things we're doing. So there are going to be hard choices that we need to make. I just want to have a quick canter through some of the things that that we are already doing. I'm sure, given the group that we have here, are aware that solar PV has been being installed in a vast number. I think I counted 8 buildings that are owned by the City Council that have solar PV on. Not all of it immediately obvious, like the climbing centre down on the quay is a City Council building that has solar PV on. The livestock centre down at Matford has one of the biggest solar arrays certainly in the southwest, potentially in the country. And we were one of the first councils to put solar PV panels on car parks. And if you've been on the top floor of either Mary Arches car park or the John Lewis car park, you'll know that your car, if you have a car and bring it into the city, can be kept dry on rainy days like today, and cool on sunny days. And on sunny days, the canopy overhead is generating electricity. We're well underway with electrifying our fleet of vehicles. More and more of our cars and small vans that zip around our parks department, and our planners use them, and housing staff use them, are now electric vehicles. And we have charging points at our various depots and centres. And if those of you who are near Water Lane may have noticed that there is an area which was scrubland and an old council depot has been cleared and is about to be handed over for the installation of a solar PV farm, we're calling it. And that is being installed with European money, God bless the EU. And that is going to enable us to generate a huge amount of electricity to store it in batteries. And the advantage of that is it's slap bang next to one of our depots where our refuse vehicles are based. And the long-term plan, as soon as we can actually get hold of some electric refuse vehicles, there are a few around, not many, is that we will transition to using those vehicles, which will be charged with the electricity that's being generated next door. The leisure centre, again, if you've been in the city centre, you'll see that that's coming on. That is being built to Passive House standards. It will be the first swimming pool and leisure centre in this country being built to Passive House standards. And now it's starting to look like the plans that I've been looking at for many years. It's very, very exciting indeed. And also we're embarking on a programme of retrofitting our council housing stock to make these houses out. We say they're our houses, but they're people's homes, addressing fuel poverty, which is a big issue, but also making them climate ready. There are a number of Langs properties in West Ex, which at last, my late husband worked on this for years, are being demolished and completely rebuilt as much more appropriate and livable and pleasant to live in homes. There are 6 homes that were part of a pilot scheme in the Burnt House Lane area, which have been retrofitted with a system that's been widely used in the Netherlands. And we are looking at the results of that. Thank you for the reminder. And again, we are now looking at how we roll out the learning from that to all of our council housing stock, so that by 2030 they will be climate ready and energy efficient homes. Looking forward to hearing from our partner organisations and taking part in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachel. If you have any questions for members of the panel, feel free to start putting them into the chat now, and we will keep an eye on that. You can address them to any member of the panel or just generally. So have a think about that. So now we'll hand over to Lynda from Exeter City Futures and the University. Lynda, over to you.
Hi everyone, afternoon. Yeah, thanks Jill, and thanks ever so much for inviting us to take part in this conversation today. Really, really excited by the opportunity. My name's Lynda Wookey. Jill mentioned I'm university, so I'm actually a University of Exeter employee, and they generously contribute me through the Environmental Futures and Big Data Impact Lab, actually, through to Exeter City Futures as Director of Policy, Innovation and Engagement here. I do have a couple of slides to share, Jill, which, oh, I can't host them.
I think Roxy will be able to allow you to share your screen.
Awesome,
yep.
Thank you. Just 1 second, make sure we find the right one. Here we go. Oh, and now you can see all my preparation. Hurrah! Take a minute, sorry about that. So I just wanted to start. I was asked to talk today just about the Net Zero plan, explain a little bit about how it's got to where it is and the progress we're making with it in the city. I just wanted to ask, first of all, has everybody seen the Net Zero plan for Exeter, the Exeter Net Zero plan? Yeah, nod of heads all rounds. Just interested to know. And everybody's read and absorbed every single word in there. It's actually been a fascinating process to be involved in putting this together. The Net Zero Exeter plan, as you can tell by the title, talks about, is designed to help the city work towards becoming net zero by 2030. Massively ambitious target, and particularly as Rachel's just been outlining, the challenges that COVID has particularly put on us at the moment, both economically and personally for many people. But it's also given rise to a lot of opportunities as well. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So in putting together the Exeter Net Zero plan has involved a huge amount of collaboration and development of relationships within the city. I was lucky enough to join the Exeter City Futures team at the beginning of this year, which meant that I got to be part of the final part of that process, where we were talking to communities and engaging with communities actually in the street, but also in online workshops. We were talking to businesses, and we're talking to the councillors and those involved in the public sector throughout the city to understand what they felt Exeter should look like when it's as a net zero city by 2030. We asked them lots of things. We asked them what did they want to see. We asked them as well what they thought the challenges were. And this plan is a first go at trying to capture all of that. So there's two things there, particularly just to take note of. One is this is a collaboration. It's not relying on any one organisation to deliver what is in this plan. It does mean it is relying on us as a city to work towards becoming net zero and working together collectively. And it states a number of objectives about how we might do that. The second thing to think about as well as it being jointly produced, collaborative, co-created, it is actually an iterative document. This isn't designed, it was published in beginning of April this year, just as we went into lockdown. It is never designed to be something that's set in stone. It was always designed that we can understand, as the city gets to understand better what becoming a net zero city looks like, that we can listen and understand as a city what else needs to be reflected in this plan, how else can we move this plan onwards, and more importantly, how can it now not be just a plan but things that we can put into action, and how do we put all of these great ideas and great things that the city has asked for into play. If you go into the plan, you'll find quite an array of information. So we try and break it down slightly to help us understand what that looks like for the city, and how else then we can identify with everybody across the city what is involved in putting this together, and how communities and businesses and politicians can interact with what's here on paper or on the screen and engage with the plan. What can they do, and how can they get involved, and what projects, what ideas can they bring to the city for the benefit of those around them in becoming net zero. And net zero is about finding ways of enjoying living in the city better, and enjoying clean air and lots of other things. You can see here we talk about amount of things here. We've actually started out with 12 goals. Those 12 goals exist, but to try and understand what those mean better, we've broken them down into 4 themes. So on the left there, you'll see the energy, the mobility, sustainability and capability themes. And so within energy, we're talking about reducing energy consumption, how we improve access to renewable energy, how we make sure that everyone in the city has healthy homes. Mobility, we're talking a lot about mobility this year, so transport. Through COVID, and this is probably what I mean when we start to talk about what COVID and the pandemic has brought out in terms of opportunity for us as a net zero city. We've talked a lot about transport this year in terms of social distancing and people wanting to walk and cycle more, and that's given us the opportunity to put in measures then to help people to be able to walk and cycle more. We've had basically given us a greater understanding about what that might look like for the city if people choose to use their cars less and look to use more sustainable and alternative ways of moving through the city. It's been really, really interesting from this point of view this year. And sustainability, one of our most successful Connect events, led by my colleague Kerry, who I think is here today. I will cite her. One of the most successful Connect events that Exeter City Futures has led this year was around greening the city. Connect events are one vehicle that Exeter City Futures has to help make the plan more accessible to people throughout Exeter. We encourage people in the communities who have projects already live to come and tell others in Exeter about those projects and to find ways and means of connecting with different resources, new ideas, helping them to spread the word and help other communities take on board those projects as well if they want to do similar things. Greening the City had a huge amount of interest. It leads into being able to enjoy your neighbourhoods more, talking about local produce. We got talking about, we had the one for growers with us, Flow Orchard, got talking about urban forests and using the streets and accessing green space as well in the community. It's led on to a number of inquiries for us, our Connect events, about what those projects might look like. And capability. Importantly, this is where it starts to talk about collective action. So the fact that this plan isn't down to just one organisation. This is not an Exeter City Futures led plan. It is not an Exeter City Council led plan. This is a plan designed for the city, and that's where our success will come from, is engaging through those multi-layers and multi-areas within the city, through politically, through business, through public sector and other organisations, communities, residents. We're looking at all ways in which we can engage with people. I think that's probably 5 minutes. I've probably taken more than 5 minutes, Jill. So I will just leave it there unless you want me to add anything else. Oh, you're on mute.
Apologies, I've muted myself from random phone calls. Thank you very much, Lynda. That's really great. And I love the last picture. I'm sure we'll hear more in answer to the questions. Tess, would you like to take first if you unmute yourself and on the next?
Hi everyone, I've already introduced myself, but I'm Tess Walsh and I've been a school striker and at the heart of Fridays for Future since its very first protest, and I'm really, really pleased to be here today and part of this discussion. It's great to see so many people here. I also think it's quite interesting to let you know that whilst my peers are upstairs enjoying their lunch break, I'm sat here on this call, which I am pleased to be here, but I also think it's something you should be mindful about. So although Fridays for Future Exeter really congratulate the net zero proposal, especially the early aim of 2030, we, reading through it and looking through it, found some fatal flaws that we think don't provide a just and effective carbon neutral path for Exeter. I think many of you have read Sophie Sleeman and Martin Redfern's Exeter Observer article, which talks over some of these points we found. And unfortunately, it was meant to be part of a longer series of articles, but many obstacles got in the way. But today I'll be talking about some of those points. So our first concern is the extent that carbon offsetting will be used to achieve net zero. For those of you who don't know, carbon offsetting is only like a compensation for emissions in one place by reducing them in another, often where it is cheaper to do so. At Fridays for Future, we are highly cautious about the offsetting theory, especially with its historical ineffectiveness. And large-scale carbon offsetting can legitimise current economic systems, allowing extractive, damaging businesses to continue their operations as usual. And although in some cases it really does make sense, in the UK and its localised plans, they should be doing all they can not to rely on offsetting like we see here. Mainly though, we concerned about the lack of accountability about business action. Considering all these proposals are framed as follows. Business in the proposal is mentioned 102 times, and there are only 2 mentions of justice, which were both by youth submissions, which I think speaks large volumes. Secondly, how will it be ensured that businesses don't backtrack on their pledges, considering they're voluntary, especially through short-term financial difficulty? Without enforcement, businesses in Exeter can return to normal practices very, very easily, especially after the COVID-19 pandemic. There's been many research by the University of Sydney and Newcastle showing the common patterns of businesses responding to climate proposals, always ending in normality so they can protect shareholders' dividends and using climate justice as a PR opportunity. The crisis already heavily affects the world's poorest, and the global wealth gap is only going to increase unless this is solved in the most just way. Finally, we question how will the neighbourhood and local communities have true engagement opportunities beyond the public consultation. Although Lynda has mentioned a couple, we know that Exeter City Futures worked with Encounter Arts on the 6th public consultation net zero plan, but only 168 people participated. And we question, how is this a participatory democracy when only 0.1% of Exeter's population participated, which was very much disproportionately represented compared to the 70 business reps that were consulted in a much lengthier, much more detailed workshop. Exeter's net zero plan shows no mention of trade unions and no mention of Exeter City Futures working with any, when the local training scheme was proposed to enable workers to adapt to new skills needed in the green economy, which we believe unions should be a key part of. Exeter City Futures also promises to provide mechanisms that ensure the voices of all citizens are heard in developing solutions to become a carbon neutral city. But we fear this presents citizen participation as a nice add-on rather than the bedrock of the process. This is not how we at Fridays for Future believe the solution to climate change be brought about. In our Green New Deal, which I'll put a link in the chat, that we wrote last summer, we call on the local authorities committing to deliberate democratic processes that make the effort to embed citizen governance in the transition to a zero carbon society. Of course, the youth strikers don't have all the solutions to climate change. I'm a 15-year-old without a geography GCSE, never mind a profession in this area. But here I am. But no one does, not Exeter City Futures or Extinction Rebellion or even Greta. But when the Chief Executive of Exeter City Council describes this current net zero plan as problematic due to the recent COVID-19 funding gaps, we see a problem. We see Exeter City Council looking towards private investment and funding more frequently and heavily, which is not acceptable. At Fridays for Future Exeter, we see the importance of communities making change feasible and accessible. The future of Exeter needs to be inspired by the people of the city, not the potential profits of any companies. That's all I have to say today. Thank you very much. I don't know where Jill's gone, but I know Madeleine's next. So
my apologies, you were
there.
picking up a little bit, Tess, and so I turned my video off to minimise use of the bandwidth. Thank you very much. That was really good, and a lot more questions there. So we'll move straight on, and I'll hand over to Madeleine now, if you would like to speak and take the floor. Thank you.
Great, thanks Jill, and thanks for having me here, and thanks for that amazing speech, Tess. That was really fantastic. Thanks for taking your lunch break to come and talk to us. So I'll try not to talk for too long, but I do tend to waffle on, so shut me up if you need to. So I'm Madeleine Greenhalgh. I am here in the capacity as a volunteer for Green New Deal Devon, and I'll talk a little bit about who we are and what we do in a sec. But just to say, in my day job, I also work as the policy lead for Regen, which is a new renewable energy not-for-profit based in Exeter. So you may have come across me in that capacity. So I'm not speaking for Regen today, but I can talk about energy with my energy hat on. I can talk about some of that stuff as well in the discussion. But as I said, I'm here as a Green New Deal UK representative today, Green New Deal Devon. So Green New Deal, just a little bit of background, they're a national organisation looking at setting up, campaigning for a Green New Deal in the UK, setting up lots of hubs across the UK. Devon is one of those, so I'm trying to get some momentum for a campaign running here in Devon. So I don't want to talk too much about what a Green New Deal is and what it does, because I think most people here will be aware of the concept, and I really don't need to go into too much detail on that. But I find that it's really helpful when I'm coming to different meetings and talking about the Green New Deal in different contexts, that it's helpful to just outline where the links are and what the principles that we're looking at are to relate to the broader conversation that we're having today. So just as a general concept, the Green New Deal is looking to create an ambitious plan to tackle climate change that doesn't just tinker around the edges. And I think that's a really fundamental point here, that too often we look at the climate crisis through kind of a really narrow lens of an environmental problem, an environmental, technical, scientific solution to be solved. But in actual fact, we see the climate crisis as a variety of issues that have both caused the climate change and are being exacerbated by climate change as well. So things like the way our economy has been shaped, the way power is concentrated into the hands of an elite few, issues like racial justice, social justice, workers' rights, all of these are affecting the climate crisis and have been affected by the climate crisis as well. So if we're just looking at environmental solutions, so solving a scientific problem, then those solutions are going to be left to politicians, scientists, academics, big businesses, and actually the average person who's really affected by all these issues is left out of the conversation. We're probably given some small morsels that masquerade as participation, but building wind turbines in the North Sea is not really anything to do with most of us on the day-to-day. So really the status quo, all those issues that I just talked about remain, they stay the same, and nothing really changes. And I think that's where Green New Deal really comes from. And I think it's interesting to think about that when you're looking at place-based solutions. So when we look at a plan for a city or a region or a county, then those sort of principles become most evident, because you're talking about the way a community needs to transition to a net zero world. So I think it's really interesting to think about that when we look at the Exeter City Plan. So when I look at things like this, when I read the Exeter Net Zero Plan, I'm thinking, okay, how does this plan look purely beyond the environmental problems towards solving some of those broader issues? And I think that's even more relevant. We've talked a little bit about COVID today already. I'm sure we'll talk about that in the discussion as well, but it becomes even more relevant when you're thinking about building back better from COVID, really looking to a better future for us all, not just one that's a green future. So looking back into the plan, I think it really does, to a certain extent, the plan really does do that. So Lynda's already talked about some of that today already. So looking, for example, at the transport section, I really like the way it looks to solutions that aren't just greening our current transport model. So it recognises that there are issues of health, issues of inequality, and they really need a different solution to transport, not just more cars but electric. That's not going to work for solving some of these issues of health and inequality and access to transport. So I think that really does look beyond that one problem. But then let's have a look at sections like the ones on food, on green spaces. So let's have a look at the green spaces issue. I think that's really great. We definitely want to provide people with green spaces, something that Green New Deal are really campaigning for. But are they really accessible to everyone? I think there's been some really interesting insight in the wake of the Black Lives Matter movements that shows that green spaces are not actually that welcoming for people of colour. And that will be the same for others too. So create green spaces, yes, but are we making sure they're really going to work for everyone? And what about food? So food is a passion of mine. I love the idea of providing the opportunity to grow food locally and getting people involved in that. So the idea in the plan of providing space and allotments for people to grow their own food is fantastic. But in reality, are people going to have the knowledge or even the time and resources to do that without any sort of broader education and surrounding community initiatives? So I love to grow. I'm lucky enough to have a garden where I can do that. But up until a few years ago, until I was taught and got involved in it, I don't think I would have had any idea where to start. and certainly wouldn't have had the money to do it because it's actually very expensive, as I'm sure many of you who are keen gardeners know. Is not a cheap thing to do. So this is looking at, yes, that's a great solution, but how do we make that better, accessible for everyone? And just the last thing I wanted to touch on was housing. I think we can look at the lens of housing. It really is where we're seeing some of these gross inequalities. Yes, improving our housing stock will help people in fuel poverty, but is that really looking at addressing some of those systemic inequalities that make houses unaffordable, that create this really long-term rental situation for many people, like myself as a millennial, I suppose, and younger people, creating kind of unfair rental markets with poor standards for landlords and a system that ultimately leaves people on the streets. Does retrofitting houses with insulation and making their energy supply clean really address that issue? I don't think it does. So I don't mean any of this to sound harsh. I do think the Exeter plan has a lot of really excellent initiatives, but I think now it's really up to the council to put some meat on the bones of those proposals, start looking at how they can use their responsibility for some of these social issues to solve them, start committing time and resource to the plans that will really help all sections of society, not just make us, you know, a net zero green city. And I'll leave it there. I'll stop waffling on now.
Thank you, Madeleine. That's really some interesting points there. So we've had